So, good morning, Thursday, the 10th of August. And just having a look at the markets, obviously there's not been too much that's occurred from a news perspective from overnight, but certainly still a bit of overhang, you would say, or a hangover of what's been going on in the Korean peninsula. The Kospi, which is the local stock index in South Korea, once again underperforming. We did have an RBNZ, that's the Reserve Bank of New Zealand rate decision, which we'll look at in a second. But otherwise, looking at the close on Wall Street, we finished down, again, the sizable amount of 0.1% in the S&P. The Dow was down 0.2, the Nasdaq down 0.1. So again, despite the kind of gravity of the situation, if it were to escalate, the market seems to be taking it for this situation will not get to that point. Not the point of military engagement, which would ultimately spell, kind of world war situation. So why has this happened? Well, there's been a couple of things. Obviously, we talked about yesterday, one of the key senators, John McCain, kind of talking down the president. We did, in fact, also have Donald talking yesterday. If I just bring up the comments that he specifically said, a little bit more, I guess, conciliatory in a way, in that he said, my first order as president was to renovate and modernize our nuclear arsenal. It is now far stronger and more powerful than ever before. Hopefully, we will never have to use this power. But there will never be a time that we are not the most powerful nation in the world. So I think that sentence maybe a few people were looking at, but more importantly was this chap, Tillerson, who's the Secretary of State. Now, he made some comments yesterday. Again, it wasn't as if he spoke and the market moved, but certainly I think the general consensus has been it was more of a knee-jerk, this kind of emotive response to Trump just speaking off the cuff, and actually all the other politicians on Capitol Hill disagreeing really with such a vehement rhetoric, so to speak. So what this has led to from a North Korean side is overnight they've added a bit more detail to their plans. They've said North Korea is considering launching 4 ballistic missiles to fall near US military bases on the Pacific island of Guam in targeting those American forces. What has happened then is the Secretary of State in the US has come out and tried to sort of calm the situation, pushing for diplomacy. We also heard from China, who ultimately is really the key player here. They followed the same tactic as Tillerson, suggesting that it's not productive to be talking the way that Trump and Kim Jong-un are at the moment. Everyone should kind of calm down, come to the table, and let's start talking about how we can fix this situation. So I would say that a little bit of the heat has come out of it, but certainly it's, if you were looking on the charts this morning, gold has managed to maintain its bid. I mean, this is when Trump initially made those comments, was here. So when we look at the total move that we've had, we've really rallied from about 1260 up to about 1285. So it's a pretty decent move. And if we start looking at this in a longer time frame, we managed through the last 2 days of 48 hours to get above that key kind of level there from the beginning of August. It was around 1280. Now we're at 1285. Next targets here. You've got that high back here towards the beginning of June. 1300, obviously a very big level. Then we had that June peak at the beginning of that month up to around 1305. But gold certainly has managed to remain on the ascent. And so just definitely worth keeping an eye on. I know Michael had some excellent trades there. So for any of the guys, any of the interns as well, Michael does put in a lot of his trades as he's in them, or as he's contemplating them, into the live chat room on Trading Live. He is, I would class that's the product he trades the most. So he has a very good feel for that particular marketplace. So I would definitely be looking at what he's looking at, and learning from an experienced person like that. Taking a look at the currency pairs here in the euro, I saw a couple of you guys looking at this as well this morning in the chat room, and I've put this on a slightly longer dated chart, 60-minute. Let's just have a look at some levels to be aware of. We are trading down this morning. The dollar is a little bit firmer, so we're up about 0.25% in the dollar index. So both pairs are a little lower here, and there's a trend line that I know Edward was looking at this morning. We were looking at the peak from around the 4th of August, and just kind of looking at this price movement that we've had over the last couple of days. You had obviously the big bout of dollar strength that really saw one of the biggest down days in euro dollar in a long time last Friday. You then had that kind of rampant dollar on the back of that US data that we had on what would have been Tuesday. And then we're down back to the lower realm of those price points at the moment. So just having a look where we are in the grander scheme of things. Obviously, you've got S1 to the downside at 17.35. You've got the low from yesterday at 17.12.5. And then S2, not too far off that low on the 27th as well. So definitely a couple of downside levels to maybe just keep an eye on in the euro-dollar currency pair. We're at session lows now as I speak, coming in towards that S1. Looking at cable, likewise then, it looks to be more of a dollar story. The kind of classic, I guess, currency moves would be in a war type situation, a flight to quality, and as we were just discussing gold at highs, then typically this would mean a push toward the global reserve currency, which of course is the dollar. So maybe that's just helping the greenback claw back, but in context, the dollar has been particularly weak over the last few weeks. So maybe also positioning-wise, ripe for a bit of a pullback from that general weakening trend. But looking at cable, just a test here as I'm speaking on a fairly interesting level. That being from 2 days ago, down at 129.69. Let's have a look at this on a slightly longer time frame. This level here around that low from the week. But also, if you look at where S2 is in cable, that's pretty much to the T, also the low that was seen, you can see circled there back on the 20th of July. So some pretty significant downside levels there for cable, just to keep an eye on this descent. Equity-wise, looking at the DAX, it's moderately lower. The Euro stocks likewise. The FTSE is underperforming though, and if you're wondering why, I did put some information into the chat room for you guys earlier. The underperformance of the FTSE is down to a large proportion of some of the index heavyweights in the FTSE going ex-dividend today. It's trimming around 40-ish points off the index, so BT, Shell, Glaxo, AstraZeneca, Lloyds all going ex-dividend today. So if you're seeing that as an outlier, that's the reason why it's not really the case. It's in line with the others. It's just being influenced by that one-off factor. Quick look at some other news flow. We've also had the Reserve Bank of New Zealand then interest rate decision. No surprise, interest rates on hold, but it was the commentary that came along with it that did see a bit of weakness in their currency. So they held rates at record low levels and said it does not expect to raise them for 2 years amid weak inflation. Monetary policy will remain accommodative for a considerable period, according to their governor, Wheeler. And that was after they kept rates, of course, at 1.75%. They also maintained their forecast that rates will not rise until the third quarter of 2019. And most importantly here, they lowered their projections for inflation. And so that was, again, it's the commentary that's moving the market there for that particular currency. Okay, a few other things to to look at on the calendar for today, because as we go into 9:30, there's a cluster of a few things you need to be aware of for the pound. This being industrial and manufacturing output figures for the month of June. We also get construction figures as well for the same month. And just looking in the context of cable, obviously we just had a look at that chart and feeling a bit of pressure amid the stronger dollar, and with some key technical points in close proximity for the cable pair. I would definitely keep an eye on this data. Certainly if it was particularly weaker than expectations, and certainly in fairly quiet markets, a break of a key technical level in thinner conditions can exacerbate the move often. And so there might be an opportunity there potentially for a downside play. You also have the UK trade balance coming out at the same time, so a real cluster of information. Looking at, just to put this in a bit of context, this isn't going to have the same kind of reaction as, say, CPI, for example, which ultimately is the critical figure in terms of UK policy, and therefore the impact that it will have underlying on the sterling currency. But nonetheless, depending on how outlying these numbers could potentially be, it could well have some influence on the currency. Going into the afternoon, you get your weekly regular US jobless claims, and you also get your PPI numbers. This then leads us into Friday's important US CPI reading, which we'll get. For anyone else looking, I know Dara, you look at the gas figure, so the natural gas storage change coming out regular time at 3:30, so I'll be covering that as well. From a speaker's point of view, you've got Feds Dudley. Now, Feds Dudley, one of the more senior ranking officials, and is a voter, of course, on the FOMC, speaking about employment trends and wage inequality in a world where we're watching not really job creation, but the pace of which people and their wages are improving is ultimately key for the inflationary aspect of federal thinking. Then this topic that Dudley is speaking on at 3 o'clock could potentially be quite interesting. So definitely keep an eye out for that. We have had a couple of comments from other Fed speakers last night, so just so you're aware of the latest, you had Fed's Evans last night said that a December rate hike is possible, but depends on inflation. Quite reasonable to begin reducing balance sheet in September. So I guess from an expectation value, that's as what the Fed have communicated, so it's pretty much in line. Evans is a voter this year. It's typically one of the more dovish-leaning members, but this comment, you could suggest, is slightly more hawkish, but it's really just more in fitting with the general stance of the Fed. We also had Fed's Bullard, a non-voter, but nonetheless he said he's not too optimistic on inflation gains this year, but he has been sounding more increasingly dovish in the last few months, so that's unsurprising commentary. Hence, that's not had any repercussion on the dollar. And that's pretty much it, really. I mean, as I say, there's not much for me to speak of in terms of fresh news. I would say the Korean situation and analysis over that is really still what much of the main news agencies are focusing on. But the kind of general setup for this morning isn't really, I'd say, risk off or risk on. It's kind of pretty neutral at the moment. I'd be probably more interested to see when the US come in, how do they pick up and read the sentiment at that point in time, given that really it's Trump which caused this latest turn of negative sentiment. But the dollar, a little bit of strength, pulling back, adding to gains seen from overnight and firming up this morning, and that's had a bit of weight on both major pairs. Keep an eye on those downside levels that we mentioned, and then in terms of gold, still positive at least for the time being. Okay guys, any questions, just let me know in the chat room. Otherwise I'm going to leave it at that. Have a good day. I'll speak to you later.